Hey everyone, it's Tim from Linessa Farm Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. So today we are interviewing Aaron Jennings. Aaron's been showing livestock pretty much his whole life. We're really excited to have him on here tonight. I know we've got lots of questions that are going to be asked. Aaron is shown primarily South Downs. He is now he's into Dorpers. He has goats. He has a large farm in Texas. So lots and lots of information. By all means, if you have questions, make sure that you ask them, and we will just kind of see how things go. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring Aaron on now. Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Doing well, Tim. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. So thanks a lot for joining us. We're really excited to have you on here. Looks like you got your son on with you tonight. That is awesome.
Tell him what your name is. Tell me your name.
Bront.
Hi.
Bront Jennings.
Hi, Bront. Hey, Bront. So another generation of sheep showing, I assume. Has Bront started showing yet, or at what age do the kids usually get started with that?
Bront, have you shown before yet?
I have.
You have? What did you show, Bront?
I show South Downs.
South Downs. Well, your dad and his dad are well known throughout the industry. I don't want to pigeonhole you, Aaron, but when you hear the Jennings name across the United States, most people associate you and your family as South Down folks. But you've kind of been shifting gears recently and kind of getting into other things. Is that a fair assessment to kind of say you guys are mostly known for South Downs, or historically have you been in other breeds as well?
No, that's a really fair assessment. We started with the South Downs when my sister turned 1 year old. She'll kill me if I age her, but about 40 years ago now. And, it's been a really great experience in the industry. And I've enjoyed it immensely. The show side of the industry really is one of those that to me is about livestock, certainly, and caretaking of livestock, but it's about our youth. And
Sure.
teaching them ethics and teaching them work responsibility, and them being able to then translate that onto, potentially a career that has nothing to do with agriculture or nothing to do with the sheep showing industry. But I feel the fundamentals that you acquire through this project it can be key for success later on. And that's one of the reasons I want my two sons involved in this. And one of them's 1 year old, so he's asleep right now, but my oldest decided to jump on here this evening with me. And so, we've been involved in the South Downs a long time. I've certainly enjoyed them. But without a doubt, in my opinion, the Dorper business and the Dorper breed has really kicked off here lately. And so I think that it'll wake him up. Yes, thank you. I think that, it's a great, another great breed that people can become involved in. And there's a bunch of them across the U.S. Sorry, we're out here this evening. Lights.
No, it's okay.
Dark.
It's okay.
But there's a lot of breeds across the U.S. someone can get involved with. And so I certainly don't want to stand here and tell you that South Downs or Dorpers are the best too, because I think that depending on your geographical area or where you want to be, you can certainly get involved in some other breeds that are well represented.
Right. And so, we've seen a lot of people moving towards, and I've seen a lot of changes since I was a kid. And, we had Cordales, and then we moved to Dorsets. And, you see trends go through the show industry, but there seem to be a few breeds that, when it comes to showing at least market lambs, that they're kind of the tried and true. They tend to perform the best. They tend to have the best carcass quality, and definitely South Down would be one of them. I mean, a lot of people breed South Down into their programs just to get those genetics. When did you really start to notice Dorpers come on the scene? And where do you see it going? Do you think Dorpers are going to be the next big thing that we're going to be seeing across the United States? We're not seeing it up here in Indiana yet. Last fair, we didn't see a single Dorper. I personally think that's going to change here in the next few years. What do you see moving forward with the Dorper breed?
Well, Dorpers were certainly introduced more into the southern states, and kind of the concept was, right or wrong, that since they're more of a hair sheep breed, that they may not be as adaptable to the colder climates. And I get that question a lot, is say, well, are these hair sheep breeds going to thrive in colder climates? Well, the thing that we have seen from the Dorper industry is that these sheep are thriving all the way from Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, New York, down into the southeast and southwest, of course. And so we are seeing that this breed is adaptable in a wide geographical setting. And to me, that's the key. I mean, if you can't pick a breed or pick something that's not going to work for you. In terms of spreading across the U.S., the numbers are definitely growing. Interest is growing, but just like anything, it takes time. And so, if you look at the Indiana State Fair, 6 to 7 years ago, there wasn't even a Dorper weather lamb class. And now there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 lambs exhibited a year there on the weather side of things. And the breeding sheep are very similar. So, in certain pockets, they're certainly a little bit more popular. But across the state, there may be counties that don't have quite the participation level or interest level. And so, that will continue to change, no doubt, as people may move from one breed to another. But I do think they'll continue to gain in popularity.
How about at North American in Louisville? What are you seeing there? Do they have a pretty strong showing? I haven't been to Louisville in a few years.
They do have a nice set of Dorpers and white Dorpers shown there at Louisville. I would say roughly 100 ewes and rams combined per breed. And so it's a very competitive show. Some of the shows down here in Texas, we may see 200 to 300 of them. But in terms of where they're at in the Midwest, we're looking at about 100 per breed. That is one unique thing about Dorpers, is that there realistically are two separate breeds. You have the Dorpers, which have the traditional black head markings that continues down into the shoulder area. And then you have the white Dorpers, which are white throughout. And so these are actually two specific separate entities within the same association and registry, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So we had a question that I think is, and I get asked this a lot, is are show breeds really pricey? So when you get into show breeds, is it going to be something that's going to be significantly more than you would expect from breeding stock? And I know you probably get asked this a lot as well. So how do you usually respond when people ask about, price difference between what they're used to maybe to breeding stock? And I guess to segue from that is, a lot of people ask me, do I have to spend a lot of money to be competitive? And I'd kind of like your take on that as well.
Well, you get that even in the commercial side of things, which I'm involved in, and you look at lamb prices and how they change and flow throughout the year. And somebody says, my goodness, can a lamb really be worth this in January or February? And you say, well, yes, but in, August they weren't. And when you translate that onto the show industry, hey, just 1 second, Ron, you got to stop. When you translate that into the show industry, there are definitely sheep that are very expensive. There is no doubt about that. There can be some seed stock animals that can really change the trajectory of the entire breed. And so I think that's the key, is that there are some animals that are no doubt could be expensive, but realistically, the range is quite wide. We're going to market animals here from slightly over commercial value that are quality seed stock animals on up to whatever two individuals might be willing to competitively bid against each other and spend. I will be the first to say spending the most money does not at all give you an automatic edge in competitiveness. An individual could spend a reasonable amount of money that fits within their budget and still be competitive if they have great work ethic, are able to get that project presented to the best of its ability and the best of its genetic potential. Certainly, I'm not going to lie to anybody. Sometimes spending a little extra money can increase the quality of animal that you can have, but sometimes there are animals available that maybe haven't reached their full genetic potential, and at the right time, they can be for sale for a very reasonable price. So a lot of that's working with a breeder, an individual that you can trust. And when they say, here's what it costs and why, you can receive a quality animal and quality project to be successful with for your kids.
Right. And I think even some of the folks that maybe aren't necessarily getting stock for show, they can still. We had a friend this year, we talked her into having her kids show one of their ewe lambs because, they plan on keeping her anyways. It worked out really well. The kid had a great time. They halter broke the animal. She's going to be easier to deal with in the future. She obviously grew fantastic because the feeding program they had her on. And then after the fair, she brought her home, and she's now a permanent fixture there on the farm. A little different than a market lamb or a castrated lamb. So I think there's options out there. And as you said, and you've judged, you've done quite a bit of judging, have you not? In your time in the okay. Now, as far as fill me in on your farm and our viewers in on your farm. Where are you guys located, and what between your farm personally and the other farms in your area that you're involved with, how many animals are you directly involved with, would you say, between sheep and goats and everything else?
That's a good question. I mean, to start off, we're located right in the middle of Central Texas. I mean, when you think the Texas Hill Country, this is pretty much, we're smack dab in the middle of it. And it used to be a rural area, but now it's certainly changing. There's more and more people moving in, and it's a nice area with close proximity to some of the major urban populations in Texas that are definitely draws from a career opportunity. For people that have both moved in out of state, and also the younger generations off ranching families. And so, it's a great area to be. And with that, we have been able to market those animals into some unique opportunities that exist in these more urban areas. For instance, one of the individuals I'm involved with was just recently featured in the Wall Street Journal for his grazing and utilization of solar farms, where his Dorper sheep actually are basically the primary weed and grass control method on these solar farms. And so, not only are these animals usable from a show ring and commercial setting, but they're also an ecologically sustainable aspect as well. So, I'm a proponent definitely of agriculture and sustainability. And with that, I do work with probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 ranches. I have to kind of think through them a little bit, and some of them have a few different divisions. And with that, we probably look at and manage over 3,000 head of sheep and about the same to a few less goats. It certainly has changed this year with the drought. Numbers have decreased in some of your more western or drier climates. And actually, some of those sheep I stayed in contact with and moved them over to the eastern side of Texas, where there was a little bit more rainfall. So we're definitely hindered here, depending upon our rainfall in the state of Texas, just because of the arid conditions that can exist. My brother's involved more in the cattle industry, so I let him fry that fish. So I just work with the sheep and goat side of things.
And I did want to talk with you about that because, the drought that you guys are experiencing in Texas is in the news. We read a lot about it here in the Midwest, and it's affecting our prices here in the Midwest as well. We have individuals shipping hay out west because the prices are good. We're seeing some effect on our lamb prices and goat prices at the sale barn here because we've got an influx that came into the market. So I think some people may think that, this is these are regional things, but really they're not. They're national problems. When you guys have a drought out there, it affects everyone. It may be out of sight for us, but it's certainly not out of mind because it affects our numbers. So what's your take on the drought? And I know it's kind of hard to say because you don't know what's coming down the pike, but what kind of an effect do you think this is going to have moving into next year, 2 years from now? We've seen farms that have been in business for a long time that are liquidating, getting rid of livestock. They simply can't feed them. do you see these people staying out of the business? Do you see them getting back in, and kind of where do you see us in a few years from now?
Well, obviously I'm in the livestock business, so you kind of have to have a positive aspect. And I really am bullish on what I think this business is going to do, because the population was challenged significantly this year in terms of culling some of these breeding stocks that exist, because like you said, they either couldn't afford to feed them, or the feedstuffs didn't really look at a bottom line very well. And so a lot of these ranches cut down numbers and maybe even totally liquidated. And so I really think there's going to be some shortages in terms of lambs and goats on the market at some point in time. And we could see some of this return to prices like we really saw skyrocket in 2021 and 2022. I think we'll see, excuse me, I think we'll see that cyclicity in terms of the market probably be more realistic, like we had seen for the past however many decades, versus just a constant high like it was from early 21 to early in 22. But you're right, all this influx of cull animals and animals that just simply weren't able to be maintained certainly changed the market without a doubt here in the last 3 to 4 months. And so, I think that as we look into this fall-born lamb crop, kid crop, and we get into the holiday season, we get into times where lamb and goat prices are historically high in the commercial industry, I really think we'll see the entire industry transform into that. And talking with some of the ranchers that have been through these types of scenarios before, have been in business through a multi-generational family, I think we'll really see that probably come true, just because they've lived through those before.
Sure. And this has happened in the past. It'll happen again. It's just a matter of how do you deal with it. Obviously, as technology increases, our knowledge base increases. I like to think we learn a little bit every time these things happen. To a certain degree, some of this stuff is out of your hands. As you know, at $5.50 a gallon diesel is not helping matters either. And we kind of got a perfect storm going on with things right now. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. I've encouraged people in our area that are thinking about getting into some of these animals that we primarily see in your neck of the woods, the Dorpers, for example. We've been encouraging people to pick those up. We think now might be a good time for some people to buy. I purchased a set of really nice Dorper ewes through you this year that came out of a farm in Texas, and we're just tickled pink with them. So I think it's a good time for some people to get in that there may be some deals to be had. What do you think about that?
In my opinion, there's no doubt about that. I think the window is kind of short-lived. I think, as we get a little bit of rain in the Southwest and we get some reprieve, I think that we'll see this, these prices change. But the breeding stock there for about a month, there was an opportunity to really grab onto some quality animals for less money than normal, I guess is what I'll say. I'm not going to say they were cheap or anything of that nature, but I certainly think that they were more readily available. And with that, you kind of saw prices decrease ever so slightly with the kind of that surplus. We've been through and marketed somewhere around 300 to 400 sheep in the last 2 months. With some of these kind of dispersals and decreases in populations, and because of that, those sheep have changed hands, and some new people got involved in the industry with that. They saw what the lamb prices have been doing, and they said, you know what, I can pencil these ewes because I have some forage available or some hay that I stockpiled a year ago. And so I think a lot of this is about management. I think you can manage for drought, you can manage for higher feed costs, and sustain those changes and those influxes that exist. Now, without a doubt, the longer something exists that you're not prepared for, you can get into a situation where you can't handle $6 a mile trucking. And that becomes a challenge. Will that recede over time as potentially fuel prices lower or not? If feed costs sustain how they are, it's going to change the industry, no doubt about that.
Sure. So I had a question here that I think was, and again, this is one that we get asked a lot. up in our area, people, we get 20. Well, you're Indiana, at least a temporary Indiana transplant. You were up here near Purdue University, you and your wife, for a period of time. So we get wet cold here in Indiana. And a lot of times people think fleece when they think that. We've done just fine with our hair sheep here. It seems like as long as we give them a shelter to get out of the wind and get out of the rain or snow, they do just fine. I have not noticed any problems. I mean, for goodness sakes, we do great with boar goats and everything else here in the area as well. So is there such thing as too cold, or is it just a management practice?
Well, I mean, theoretically, yes, there is such a thing as too cold for any animal, but it's all about management. It's all about shelter. It's all about the proper facilities. It's all about making sure that an animal has enough forage or feed stuff available to it to maintain its body temperature through those times. Living in Indiana, I never thought I'd deal with, I say not living in India, but prior to living in Indiana, I never thought I'd deal with polar vortexes or scenarios where you have below 0 degree weather for 2, 3, 4 days. I mean,
right.
And without a doubt, in our setting, as well prepared as we were, we had potential for 100% indoor facilities. There were just simply animals that couldn't withstand that, potentially, for maybe a reason because they had another health issue prior to that. And because of that stress factor and because of that weather that existed, you might have lost an animal that otherwise you may not have. And so you may see some of that without a doubt, but I don't think that's specific to Dorpers. I think that when you talk about any livestock species, that's where you're going to get into that. And so the Dorper breed, like I said, has really thrived in some of these colder climates. Riverwood Farms in Ohio was one of the major purebred and full-blood Dorper breeding studs in the U.S. They recently dispersed, but they had no issues with it. And like I said, we see them in Oregon, we see them in Washington, Minnesota, New York, New Jersey. And so I think they can certainly withstand the cold. Now, do you want to go shear them, get them outdoors, or try to take some fleece off of them and get them outdoors in the middle of winter? No, I would not recommend that. But management is key.
Sure. So about half of our folks, and you're one of the moderators on our Tack box on Linessa Farms Tack box, and so you already know we've got about a 50-50 spread between sheep and goats, and so I kind of wanted to segue a little bit into goats, but I guess a good stepping off point for that is you really have a lot of good communication with people from all over the world, not just here in the United States. So you kind of have your finger on the pulse of, the industry in Africa and other places like that. And I know you just had some communications with some individuals in Africa regarding livestock management practices and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was about? Maybe anything new that you picked up or anything interesting you can share with us?
Well, as part of the Texas Hill Country Dorper Association and being a member and working with them, I recently had the opportunity to spend a couple of days with Ashley Phillips. He's the son of Mickey Phillips and son Dorper in South Africa, Dorpers and white Dorpers. And so that was really a great opportunity. I enjoyed visiting with him and learning some. Just one second, what, buddy?
It's a little dark on my side.
It's a little dark on your side. Getting an opportunity to spend time with someone that, has a different perspective on the industry. We deal with a lot of the same challenges. It was interesting to spend 2 days with a guy from halfway across the world, and you realize, hey, land costs and feed and forage costs in South Africa are challenging as well, depending on the situation. But what really makes it, what was really unique as well is we deal with some of the same positives also. The people in the industry, people wanting to get into the agricultural industry, and learning how they've adapted over time there with their climates, how they have looked at changing their sheep phenotypically, and as a result, of course, genetically as well, and how that's been a positive for them in dealing with maybe these prolonged droughts or a change in climate or something of that nature. And so I certainly think that's something that we can glean from them here in the United States is it's not always going to be the same. nothing ever stays the same. And so we have to be willing to adapt, and we can't be too stubborn to say, you know what, it's worked this way for 20, 30, 40 years, but it's not going to work this way anymore. And
Right.
so that is one of the reasons I got involved with the Dorper sheep breed myself, is because I grew up more in the wool sheep industry, and wool was a valuable commodity, and wool was a sought after commodity, and sheep shears were easy to come by. And that's just simply not the case anymore. And the Dorper breed, I think, offers us more flexibility for that, and targets a market share slightly better than that wool sheep industry. So, that's one of the reasons that I think you have to be willing to adapt and change over the course of potentially your entire career within agriculture.
Right. And we've noticed that significantly with the Dorpers that we've had. I guess the main thing that I noticed about the Dorpers that we got, and we've had some Katahdin crosses in the past. We've had some Katahdins cross with Dorper in the past, but the feed conversion ratio of these ewes is just fantastic. It's not even, I'm kind of a numbers guy. I would say it's got to be at least a standard deviation difference between them and some of our wool breeds. We simply put them out on pasture. We give them the same feed. We give them the same nutrition. We give them the same environment, and we just sit back and we watch them grow. And these Dorpers they just simply pull away from some of our other breeds that we have. And then you look at carcass quality on top of that. And especially when you start working your way back the animal and you get back into that hind quarter, I don't have anything on my farm that can compare with what I'm seeing in the leg and the hindquarter of these Dorpers is just fantastic. So it's really changed our mind just looking at them over a season or two, and we're kind of scratching our head and saying, if we can get this for the same input, if we can get this output for the same input, why would we not? But we have an influx of demand for goat. We have a lot more ethnic buyers that are in our area, and it's all over the United States. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I prefer goat meat to lamb myself. It tastes better to me. It seems to me that goats bring a very unique set of challenges for multiple reasons, and I'd like to know, when you think about raising goats as opposed to raising sheep, are there any unique challenges that come to mind with goats as opposed to sheep, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no doubt, goats have. I mean, just to start off with, it's a very simple feedstuff aspect. Goats have evolved over millennia to browse more, to eat more leaves, to eat more trees, more forbs. Grass is really a tertiary consumption aspect to them versus sheep. And so, what a lot of the ranches that I see run them in conjunction with each other, because they can appreciate the feedstuffs that those goats will consume, and then also appreciate the feedstuffs that the Dorpers will consume, or, cattle or something of that nature. And really, in my opinion, pasture management, rotational grazing is very critical when you talk about either species. But it's a little more unique on goats because they can certainly challenge maybe your native woodland area or something of that nature. They also eat hays differently. We feed different types of hays to them, something with a solid stem versus a hollow stem type hay. They like that palatability and that texture. They like to chew. They like to nibble, use their lips and consume those types of feedstuffs. And so I certainly think that's important as you're looking at a difference between the species. Also, certainly, in my opinion, goats can be slightly more susceptible to the cold just because they don't have that wool on their back, even like some Dorpers do with a little bit of a cape. But I still think, again, you talk about management, you're going to be very similar. Fencing is one of the biggest issues with goats. Nanny goats are going to grow horns. They can get their horns stuck in some fences. You want to have sound management practices there. And for some reason, some goats just love to escape. And we have seen that here in some situations where we didn't even know we had a hole in the fence. And I got a set of goats in that pasture, and by gosh, they find it faster than we do. I can tell you that much. Then sometimes they never leave. Sometimes they'll never find a hole. So little bit of that's habit and temperament. But, I think when you look at the two and you're saying, well, do I want to get involved in the goat industry? Do I want to get involved in the sheep industry? You need to understand what your clientele desires and how you have a potential to market them. Because like you mentioned, there is certainly some difference in personal preference on whether you're looking at goat meat, whether you're looking at lamb, what size of animal do you want to harvest, what type of animal, an intact male or an unblemished animal versus something that, if you don't castrate a goat kid, he could become fertile in 5 months and be potentially inbreeding, your herd. And so, but if your buyer pool wants an intact male, then you may have to develop a different facility area to put those goat kids into until they're ready for a specific time of the year, for that buyer pool. So you do have to kind of look at these industries whole scale and with kind of a 30,000 foot view and say, how am I going to reach my goals and manage these animals appropriately?
So for someone getting into raising sheep and goats, is there a perfect setup if you have somebody come to you and say, how many should I get? What should I start off with? I normally tend to steer people towards if they want to breed, I'll say, hey, get a couple ewes, get a ram, get a couple does, get a buck. Start off simple, go through one season, go through the process slow and easy with maybe just a couple does or ewes, do the delivery process, get your feet wet, and then, come back to me in a year and we'll talk. Because I get a lot of people that come to me and say, I think I want to get 50. And I'm like, no, you don't. You want to talk to me in a year. Would you have a preference as far as numbers starting off for someone? And would you have a breed or a species that you would recommend? I know that's a loaded question, but if you can, I'll just pass that on to you and let you figure that out. What do you think?
Well, it takes a lot of work. I mean, there's no two ways about it. If you're involved in agriculture, you're going to be out breaking some ice in the winter. You're going to be out putting out some hay. You're going to be making sure those animals are healthy on a daily or semi-daily potentially basis. So, you have to be saying, okay, how much time do I really have to give to this if it's a hobby? Or even if it's something you're looking at on an economic side of things, you have to say, okay, can I spend enough time to make sure I'm managing these animals properly? And so I am the world's worst at starting small. I don't start small at anything. I never really have. I got involved in some exotic side of the industry this year, and I thought I'd get 10 or 15. I ended up with about 80 of them. Okay. But, I am learning through that hey, you know what? Maybe I got a little big, a little quick, and I've got to take a step back and look at my facilities and some of my management aspects. And so you have to know what your facilities can handle. In a climate like y'all are in Indiana or anywhere that gets significantly cold weather, even here the last couple of years, we've had some ice storms in February. They have presented some major challenges for people in this industry. And so if we didn't have some of the barn space that we have and the shelters that we have, we would have lost animals potentially from that. So you have to look at your facilities, look at your time, say how much can I manage? Whether that's 2 females or 3 or 4 or 5, that's kind of a personal opinion on that, and a ram or a buck or something of that nature, obviously to get those animals bred, or if you purchase them bred, you're still going to need that male to achieve that. So yes, start with a realistic number that you can manage and go through a breeding season, go through a lambing or a kidding season, something like that, and say, okay, you know what? I could manage a few more potentially. Then you expand and you move on up to a point where you say, this is enough for me. And that's the approach that I would take when you're looking at expansion. When you're looking at what kind to get, some of that's just aesthetics. What I hear that all the time. I say people say, well, I prefer the white Dorpers. I prefer the black Dorper. Black Dorpers are just commonly called Dorpers. But, I prefer the whites or the blacks. You hear that as a slang, if you will. And that's just a personal preference, and I say, well, what makes you like them better? And some say, oh, I love the way the black is on their neck and their head. Some are like, I just love that they're all one color on the white. It's just simply personal preference. However, I would highly recommend you get an animal that is adaptable to your climate and is adaptable to your rainfall patterns, is adaptable to your setting. You have to, and that's what I like about Spanish goats and Dorper sheep. Admittedly, I think they're very adaptable. I think that they have been honed over time to be extremely maternal, extremely fertile, and can raise progeny on down the road for you successfully.
Right. So one of the big questions that I get asked by people, and I never really quite know how to respond to this, is they say, I push a lot about not getting cheap males. I don't know why people love getting cheap bucks and cheap rams. And I try to explain to people, I'm like, hey, this is 50% of your genetics. If you want to fool around with something, I'd rather see you fool around with a ewe or a doe. If you want to try something, if you want to do some weird science kind of stuff, do it with a ewe or doe, but don't go cheap on your rams or your bucks, because you'll pay for it. And so then I tell people, I say, all right, if they want to get two, they're saying, well, I get two ewes or two does and I buy a good ram or a good buck, and then next year he's worthless to me because I can't breed him back on any females that I hold, and the resale value drops. It can drop. It's like buying a car. As soon as you pull that ram or buck off the lot, his resale value is going to drop a little. So is that where LAI and AI can kind of bridge that gap, or, how would you respond to that?
Well, you have to have a fertile male on the premise, in my opinion, or at least available to you to be able to make sure that those animals conceive, even with an LAI or something of that nature. I mean, we sell semen. We're in the semen selling business at times because I think it is a more economical way at times to move your flock forward genetically than what you might could afford on one of these higher end seed stock type animals. But you are 100% correct in the fact that male has the most impact genetically across the flock of any animal that you have purchased. And so, in this industry, we see oftentimes some of those males inflated in price because those genetics. A lot of times you see females bring just as much because they're extremely valuable genetically as well. You should not chintz on your ram or your buck, in my opinion. Now, what is that? What is that number? It's a little bit different for everybody because of what they think they can see on the backside of that investment. But generally speaking, most people say a ram will easily influence and is worth, in theory, about 2 to 3 lambs, if that makes sense. And that's kind of a number that's always been kicked around a little bit in the commercial industry, is that whatever 2 or 3 lambs are going to bring commercially value, that's probably about what you should spend on the male side of things, which in January, February this year, that was $750 to $1,000 for a commercial ram. So I think that's a little bit inflated sometimes, but if you really want something that has been selected and honed genetically for carcass merit or growth potential, you're going to have to pay for that to some degree, and it's just a simple fact of it.
Right. So somebody just asked a question, and this is one of our followers, and I know she's just getting ready. She hasn't got animals yet, but she's thinking about getting into animals here soon. And so the question is it better to get a pregnant doe or a pregnant ewe, or is it better to kind of get your own and go from there? And I suspect, my gut response is that sure depends on who you're getting it from. If I'm getting it from a reputable breeder and I know what I'm getting and I trust that person, that makes a whole lot of a difference. If I'm just getting it from Joe Schmo down the street, then I probably would tend to steer someone away from this. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that was pretty much what I was going to kind of say as a whole. When you look at an animal that's about ready to go through parturition, or in this case kidding or lambing, when we're talking about the two different species, you can't just purchase one 2 months, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months away from that process and fix what has possibly gone wrong prior to that. Okay, if that makes any sense. There's a lot of nutritional components that go in and leading up to the kidding and lambing side of things that are very key. You know, is that lamb or that kid going to come out with a lot of life and vigor and health, and is the female going to be in the proper body condition to be able to lactate? So definitely you want to be buying from someone that's reputable. That aside, is buying a bred ewe or bred doe a good solid idea? You know, I think there's positives to it. You're getting a quicker return on your investment, realistically. If you buy one that's confirmed bred, you are having the opportunity to go through really what probably people enjoy the most is the lambing and kidding side of things. It's the most rewarding. Admittedly, sometimes it's the most disappointing if something goes wrong. And these are real world animals. Things don't always go as you might have hoped. And it can be a simple freak accident. You know, you just don't know. Get stepped on, or for some reason just is a stillborn. That's realistic. It can happen. And so, you know, but as a whole, I sell bred females, but there's risk associated with that. No doubt. You transport a female across any distance. I don't care whether it's down the street or across the U.S. That animal is going to have some stress. That animal is going to be exposed to potentially some new diseases that you don't even landowner you have. And so you got to be careful. You've got to be cognizant of some of those things. Take the proper precautions, potentially like feeding an antibiotic like chlorotetracycline, which I know you've got in one of y'all's products there at Linessa Feeds. And so those are some things that you need to make sure you have on the background side of things, and that you can be prepared for. And I think I may have said the wrong name there on your feed side of things, so I apologize. But
foundation feed, but it all runs together. Yeah, it's fine. Right. It's fine. So I guess to kind of shift gears, and I probably should have spent more time on this, but that's okay. Probably one of my weakest points is showing. So for people that are looking to have their kids start showing lambs or goat kids, how much time do they need to have that animal on their farm realistically before they're going to show it? What's the best age to get them at? And how much time do they need going into a county fair or open class show or anything like that?
Well, in Indiana, we saw a lot of those animals exhibited in July and August from the county show standpoint, and then on into the state fair. Most of those animals were purchased or picked up in roughly March at the latest, and maybe a few on into April. You know, that time frame. Some of that's just age. You have to be able to feed that animal appropriately, manage it right from a body condition standpoint, a maturity aspect. So you need to be able to get that animal on your premise and manage it correctly on that side of things. And I will say, to some degree, the younger an animal is, the easier it is to get it used to you, to get it calm, to get it used to your kids that are around it. If you're looking at it from a youth show standpoint. And so I would say that you would want to get it obviously no younger than 60 to 75 days, because that's probably when they're going to be weaning it. But somewhere in that 90-day mark old is a realistic number to look at purchasing it from someone. You can buy animals on up 6 months or a year that haven't been halter broken or not used to you, and you can still prepare that animal for a show. Maybe if you're showing it as a yearling, let's say. But I always like to get them on my premise. I always like to get them familiarized with my kids, myself, our feed program, things like that, because that way we can eliminate potential issues just with time.
So we get asked a lot about safety. You've got kids, you've got youngsters around the farm. I raised my daughters around the farm. We always are cognizant about safety, and it's not just animal safety. There's, on a farm, there's all kinds of things that we have to watch out for, be it equipment that we're running, climbing over things, jumping over things. You know how kids are, and adults aren't much better sometimes. But when people ask me, is this safe for my kids and what kind of precautions do I need to take? I guess my mind usually goes to breeding males. They can, even the nicest breeding male can show aggression when females are in estrus or just throughout the year for whatever reason, if the mood catches them wrong. But I think sometimes people have a little bit of maybe they're not as precautious as they should be with females either. I've had some females try to clobber me before as well. So when it comes to general safety and things you want to consider with the kids on the farm, is there anything that jumps to mind or that you would caution people towards?
Well, like you said, we're raising a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. My 1-year-old, one thing he loves to do is he wants to try to touch them. And so we got a set of sheep in the pen. I'm drenching them, or I'm taking care of them, marking them, doing something nature. He reaches an arm through the fence. There's a realistic chance that you could hit that, get it stuck against the panel, and break his arm. And so, I holler at him or my wife, or try to jump over there myself and get his arm out of the fence, because there's just freak things that can occur. I've seen people blow an ACL or an MCL walking down the street type stuff. They just step off a curb and there you go. There was no intention, So yes, random incidents can happen. The agricultural industry can have some of those things occur, and particularly with equipment, and in particularly sometimes with males. And you see that more in bulls versus rams or a billy goat. They can hit you, but it's probably not going to severely injure you.
Right.
You're going to have a bruise. You're going to be sore. Could you break an arm or something? Yes, maybe so. I had a ram once. At that time, was the best ram I'd ever raised. He's the number one herd sire ram for the entire Southdown breed. And by himself, he was the best sheep you could ever be around. I'd trust him with my 1-year-old. When you put him with a set of ewes, he would eat your lunch. I reached over to clean out a water trough once. I forgot. I probably was on my phone for all I remember. Next thing I remember, I woke up looking at the roof of my barn. He hit me right square on the head, and he was in with a set of ewes. And so, there is some danger associated with it. I'm not going to pull the wool over your eyes on that side of things, but just be intelligent. Pay attention. It's just like driving a car. If you're on your phone, you're eating, you're putting on makeup in the car, and you rear end somebody, you don't have much to blame except yourself. And so that's just kind of the way I would say most agricultural side of things on. You just need to pay attention, and things are going to be okay. Take the proper precautions. Don't carry your kid with you on an open cab tractor with a bale of hay in the air. Okay, if you're in a cab skid steer moving hay around, that's fine. Shut the door. Okay, you're going to be okay. Just be intelligent about these things. You hear issues that have happened in agriculture, and I'm not saying people weren't paying attention, but sometimes you're like, man, that, people say don't do that, and sometimes we say, oh, it'll be okay, and it goes wrong.
Right. How important is biosecurity? And I know, you and I have both been to farms on opposite ends of the spectrum. I've been to some farms where I'm just like, oh, good Lord, and then I go to other farms, and Jeff won't mind me sharing this. Anybody that's been to Jeff Hunter, and for good reason. Jeff truly runs a closed flock, and he has extreme biosecurity. You show up there, you're going to scrub in. I feel like I'm at work, I'm going into surgery when I go to Jeff's farm. But how important is biosecurity? And with that being said, a lot of folks will tell you, they're like, I take an animal to the fair, it ain't coming home. Do you think the answer is somewhere in the middle, or do you think that's warranted?
Well, I hate to think of what you related to when you came to my barn in Indiana. If you came here to the ranch in Texas, you might say it's like being in the combat field or something. So there's a lot of different perspectives on this. Maintaining good health, very important. Okay, that's the bottom line to it. How you get to that, or how you achieve that, there's a lot of perspectives. Okay, we are not a 100% closed flock. We're not a biosecure facility. Okay, we haul animals to a show. They are exposed to whatever is at that show, be it the pins, the shavings, the sand, the judge's hands, moving from sheep to sheep. So kind of the approach we have taken is that our animals have the capability to be exposed to everything, just because we're going to go out in public with them. Okay. With that, we manage them appropriately. Okay. Sometimes we say, hey, you know what? We thought there was a sick sheep there. Let's quarantine these for a few days, kind of see if anything happens here. There's realistic incubation periods on some of these diseases. Okay. Nothing happens. We introduce them back into the rest of the flock. We look at feeding medication sometimes during pregnancy, because we know some of these sheep could be naive, that sometimes I purchase, to Vibrio or chlamydia, which sound terrible. Okay. I'll be the first to say it sounds awful. And it can be awful if you don't vaccinate or have a closed flock or take care of those animals. But one of the things that scares me sometimes is taking an animal from a completely naive population and exposing it to those diseases, because when it comes off a premise, like you said, for show or sale or anything, that's it. It can be exposed anywhere along the way. So we run a flock that is exposed to disease. I know that, but we manage it and mitigate that exposure through either vaccines or handling them with some antibiotic protocol at times.
Sure. And I can appreciate that. We've brought in some, because of the nature of what we do with education, we have all kinds of different breeds. So if I talk to our customers or we make these videos, I can say, yeah, I've got a Rambouillet, I've got a Columbia, I've got a Dorper, I've got a Dorset, whatever. And, we brought in some Rambouillets from Helly Ranch out in Montana. We brought in some Rambouillets last year that hadn't seen a person for more than 5 minutes of their life, which I will tell you was quite an interesting experience. We got them on the trailer, and the first time we put grain out in front of them, they just looked at it. They didn't even know what it was. They just looked at it, and they looked at us, and that grain sat there for 2 days before they even nibbled on it. But we had to vaccinate them because they were so naive to any kind of the abortion strains that we would have on our farm. It was just, it would have been ridiculous for us to assume that they weren't at least potentially getting set up for that. Now, as they're on the farm for a few years and they're exposed to things, we can kind of adjust our protocol. But I tend to lean kind of in the direction, or at least what I was assuming you were saying, is that, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have them exposed to some of these bugs. I think in some cases it's a moot point. I think people try really, really hard to prevent, well, look at CL, and I don't want to get in CL. We can go down that rabbit hole, but it wasn't too long ago that people were saying, oh, well, if you get CL, you got to call them, you got to kill them, and look, you got to clean house, and good luck. That can be carried by flies. It can be carried by shears. It can be carried on your clothing, on your feet. Like, you're not going to stop it. And so, you just have to, I think, have that happy medium. And kind of going back to what you said, we have to be good consumers of educational material. You have to be a good consumer of new information, and you have to be willing to accept that. I'll be the first one to tell you, I learn new things all the time. I do not handle or manage my farm the way that I did 3 years ago, let alone the way my father did 30 years ago. It's constantly evolving. So I think that's part of the process as well. So I got another question here, and that's a good one. So what's the difference between white Dorpers and black-headed Dorpers? Is the meat quality better in one than the other? Does one shed their coat better than another?
So the difference in them was one of the original parentage breeds that the South Africans utilized to create these two specific breeds. So they are 75% related to each other, basically, if you want to punch it down to numbers. Okay. And with that being said, there's a little difference, in my opinion, sometimes on phenotype. The white Dorpers can tend to be a little shorter, stockier, stouter to the ground, and the black-headed Dorpers can be maybe a little more elevated, a little more leg length on them. From a meat quality standpoint, we don't see any difference on them. They've done some research on that. There really is no difference there. I think what you would probably see is that there's more difference between animals within the blacks and whites than between the breeds, if that makes any sense. If you've had a flock that's been really, really selected for meat quality, then yes, they're probably going to be better than one of the other breed, but they might be just as much better than another flock that hasn't been selected for that. And really in the lamb industry, we don't see a lot of hard carcass data coming back in terms of tenderness or marble compared to the beef cattle industry. And so when you say, hey, Dorpers are really good at meat quality, a lot of that is a function of they're high in their lean to fat ratio. They are tender, and they are pleasant to the taste. In other words, since they're not a wool breed, excuse me, I got flies and moths getting all over me. We did have some rain, so now we got gnats. But since they're not a wool breed, they're a breed that doesn't produce as much lanolin, which if you think about lamb, admittedly, and you think about what lamb tastes like, sometimes, aren't you supposed to be in bed? You sneaked up. You think about kind of that lamb taste, and Dorpers do not have as much prevalence of that. To answer the third part of that question, which one sheds their coats better, I would, in my opinion, say that the white Dorpers can sometimes shed just a notch better, because a lot of times you also see them mixed with a St. Croix or a Katahdin, and they can kind of maintain that white color. And so you might see a lot of 3/4 or 7/8 blood Dorpers, and they got a little St. Croix or Katahdin mixed in there. They're like the Royal White breed would be, and they tend to shed just a notch better. When you crossbreed a black-headed Dorper with those other hair breeds, a lot of times their bodies become splotched in color. You kind of see a paint pattern, and some people like it, some people don't. Again, a personal preference side of things. So a lot of times you see that black Dorper kind of shed a notch better because some of the heterosis that exists there.
All right, good deal. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. We covered a lot of ground, very good stuff. We'd like to have you back on again, maybe kind of get into more specifics about maybe preparing for lambing or maybe more specific topics with you. You've got a lot of good information. So for our viewers that want to contact you, we're going to put all the contact information in the description below, and I'll work with you to make sure that we have that up to date. And we'll probably end up actually splitting this video up since we covered so many good topics. We may have the main video and then have some other smaller segments out there as well. So for people wanting to get in touch with you and get animals from you, you guys most definitely sell year round, do you not? Both sheep and goats. And if you're kind of my go-to guy, if you don't have it, you most definitely know somebody that does, right?
Well, we work with, like I said, about 5 to 7 different ranches, and so we're able to look at some options there from a marketing standpoint. We get a little limited on late gestation animals that we don't want to move, or transport, but usually we have some ewe lambs, yearlings, or potentially shortbred females that we can look at marketing. And I'd be glad to work with people. I've certainly enjoyed working with the Tack Box Facebook page and some of the people that have messaged me off of that or contacted me. I'm happy to help.
Sure.
And if I don't get with you, it's not because I don't want to, it's just because I may be tied up or busy, and I might not text you back for a day, and I apologize. But I respond well to Facebook message or text. Yeah, calling is tough because I'm in an area where sometimes I don't have cell service, and I just don't even know you called, and
Sure.
and you could leave a voicemail. It may not even pop up for a couple of days. So,
Sure.
I would highly encourage people Facebook message or text me, and I'm sure they can get that information from you, or however we're going to share that with them if you so choose.
Sure.
But I'd certainly be glad to help people as they may look to get involved in either goats or the Dorper side of the industry.
Sure. Yeah. And for our viewers out there that are watching, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you give us a thumbs up, and make sure you share this with any of your friends. If you're a member of other groups, make sure you share this as well. Like I said, lots of good information. It's good to have the opportunity to talk with you tonight, Aaron. Thank you very much. And we hope your lambing and kidding season goes well this year. I'm sure we'll talk to you before then, but again, thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. So I am Tim from Linessa Farm Specialty and Heirloom Livestock here with Aaron Jennings. Thank you very much for joining us again tonight, and we look forward to seeing all of you again real soon. Thanks.
Thank y'all.